Israel, Somaliland, and Turkey recognition warfare in the Horn of Africa. There are regions where geopolitics announces itself with explosions, troop movements, and collapsing governments. And there are regions where power shifts silently through port access, diplomatic signals, and the quiet redefinition of legitimacy. The Horn of Africa belongs to the latter category. What appears calm on the surface is, in fact, one of the most structurally fragile and strategically contested zones in the international system. Israel's engagement with Somaliland and Turkey's sharp resistance to it is not a marginal diplomatic disagreement. It is a recognition battle, a structure over who gets to decide which political entities matter, which borders are inviolable, and which rules are flexible when power demands it. Beneath the language of sovereignty and international law lies something more fundamental: control over access and precedent and strategic geometry. This is not about sympathy for Somaliland, it is about leverage. The Horn of Africa, from backwater to bottleneck. For decades, the Horn of Africa was treated as a humanitarian problem rather than a strategic arena. Famine, piracy, civil war, and weak institutions dominated the narrative. That framing is now obsolete. The Horn sits astride the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, one of the world's most critical maritime choke points. Roughly 10 to 12% of global trade, including a significant share of Europe and Asia energy flow, passes through this narrow corridor linking the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean. Any disruption here reverberates instantly through insurance markets, energy prices, and naval deployments. The recent militarization of the Red Sea, driven by instability in Yemen, attacks on commercial shipping, and heightened great power naval presence, has transformed the Horn from a peripheral concern into a strategic multiplier. The influence doesn't require territorial control, it requires access, predictability, and patterns who can deliver stability without constant crisis management. This is where Somaliland enters the picture. Somaliland, the unrecognized constant. Somaliland declared independence from Somalia in 1991 after the collapse of Syed Barre's regime. Unlike southern Somalia, it doesn't descend into peripheral fragmentation. Over 3 decades, it built institutions, held elections, maintained internal security, and established a functioning political order with minimal external assistance. Yet it remains unrecognized. This paradox is not accidental. International recognition is not awarded based on governance performance. It is awarded based on systemic convenience. Recognizing Somaliland would raise uncomfortable questions for a dozen of states whose borders are equally artificial and whose internal cohesion is far weaker. Somaliland has therefore existed in diplomatic limbo, stable enough to be useful but inconvenient enough to be ignored. Israel's engagement threatens to end that silence. Recognition as a strategic instrument. Diplomatic recognition is often framed as a legal or moral decision. In practice, it is a strategic act with cascading consequences. Recognition alters trade possibilities, security cooperations, intelligence access, and international signaling. It also reshapes incentives for allies, rivals, and local actors alike. Israel's approach to Somaliland follows a familiar pattern in its foreign policy history. When formal alliances are constrained, Israel has repeatedly pursued peripheral partnerships. This relationship often offer access and strategic depth without the burden of ideological alignment and institutional dependency. From Israel's perspective, Somaliland offers several advantages, starting with geographical proximity to the Red Sea without entanglement in Somalia's internal chaos, relative political coherence compared to Mogadishu's fragmented authority, limited ideological exposure, particularly to Islamist networks that are hostile to Israeli interests, strategic ambiguity, allowing engagement without full spectrum commitment, recognition or even the credible threat of recognition transforms Somaliland from a passive actor into a strategic node. It signals that Israel is willing to challenge entrenched diplomatic norms when those norms no longer serve its security calculus. This is not altruism, this is positional maneuvering. Turkey's Somali strategy, investment narrative and control. Turkey's opposition to any move towards recognizing Somaliland is rooted not in abstract legalism but in material investment and narrative construction. Since 2011, Ankara has positioned itself as Somaliland's most committed external partner. That the intervention began with humanitarian aid during famine, but evolved into something far more durable: infrastructure projects, diplomatic shielding, economic ties, military training. Somaliland became a keystone in Turkey's broader effort to project influence across Africa and the Red Sea basin. Crucially, Turkey's model depends on recognized sovereignty. Ankara works through internationally accepted governments, embedded itself deeply in state institutions. This approach allows Turkey to frame its presence as supportive rather than coercive, moral rather than imperial. Somalia is central to that story. Recognition of Somaliland directly undermines this architecture. It weakens Mogadishu's claim to exclusive authority, dilutes Turkey's role as a guarantor of Somali unity, and introduces an alternative pathway to influence, one that doesn't rely on Ankara's development and security model. For Turkey, this is not merely a diplomatic disagreement, it's a threat to strategic sunk cost. Two competing logics of order. At a deeper thread, the Israeli-Turkey tension reflects a clash between two competing logics of regional order. Turkey's logic: borders must be preserved to prevent fragmentation. Sovereignty is the foundation of stability. External influence should reinforce existing states. Development and security assistance are tools of legitimacy. Israel's logic: borders are contingent, not sacred. Fragmentation is a reality, not an anomaly. Stability comes from functional partners, not formal recognition. Access and leverage matter more than institutional purity. Neither logic is morally superior, but they are structurally incompatible. Somaliland becomes a testing ground where these visions collide. The African President Trap. African resistance to Somaliland recognition is driven less by Somalia itself, but more by the fear of precedent. Many African states emerged from colonial borders that ignored ethnicity, historical and economic realities, and survival of these states depend on a agreement, tacit agreement. Do not reopen border questions. Recognizing Somaliland risks shattering that consensus. Yet this restraint clears its own contradictions. Somaliland governs itself more effectively than many recognized states. The gap between performance and legitimacy grows wider each year. External actors are increasingly more willing to exploit that gap. Israel's engagement doesn't remove this dilemma, it exposes it. Gaza, optics, and strategic contamination. The broader geopolitical environment intensifies this dispute. Israel's actions are now interpreted through the lens of Gaza, regardless of context. Somali leaders have attempted to link Somaliland's recognition to speculative plans involving Palestinian displacement and a narrative that Somaliland itself has rejected. Whether true or not, the allegation serves a purpose. It politicizes recognition and forces regional actors to choose sides in a wider ideological conflict. Turkey, already positioned as a vocal critic of Israel, treats this issue as symbolic. What could have remained a technical diplomatic maneuver becomes a proxy confrontation layered with emotion, identity, and global polarization. Escalation risks and strategic miscalculations. The recognition battle carries risk for all parties. Israel links alienating African institutions, complicating relations with non-aligned states, and becoming entangled in local dynamics it cannot fully control. Turkey risks overextension during a contained dispute into a border confrontation that invites additional external powers into the Horn. Somaliland risks instrumentalization; its long-standing aspirations become leverage in conflict far larger than itself. Somalia risks erosion of sovereignty at a moment where it remains strategically vulnerable. What makes the situation dangerous isn't immediate conflict, it's strategic miscalculation, each actor assuming the other will blink first. Recognition as signal, not resolution. Israel's engagement with Somaliland and Turkey's resistance reveal a changing international environment. Recognition is no longer a binary legal status. It is a signal, a bargaining chip, and a tool of pressure. The Horn of Africa is no longer a passive statement. It is an active arena where norms are contested and rewritten. Both partnership and recognition have become instruments of competition in a system where power increasingly triumphs convention. Whether Somaliland ultimately gains broader recognition remains uncertain, but the debate itself has already altered the strategic landscape. Once legitimacy becomes negotiable, it cannot easily be restored into silence. And in geopolitics, forcing the system to confront its contradiction is often more disruptive than winning the entire argument at all.